Here is every cut character that I could find in the Batman Arkham games. This includes big supervillains that Batman could have gone up against, to NPCs we could have interacted with. This also contains voice recordings of characters you probably didn't even know existed, so sit back, relax, be sure to like and subscribe, and let's get started. Surprisingly, Batman Arkham Asylum is full of information about cut characters. This is mainly because of a recovered Rocksteady employee's hard drive which contained files of the 2007 build of Arkham Asylum, and although this hard drive was corrupt, data miners such as Back to Life was able to help out in order to at least access some of these files. Before we look at that though, we're gonna have a look at the villains that were confirmed to be cut from the game, starting out with some more recognizable faces. Here's a cut villain that you probably heard me mention at least once before, which is Mad Hatter, who surprisingly didn't show up in Arkham Asylum apart from one Easter egg. His role in the story was that he was going to be working with Poison Ivy during the boss fight we had with her, where they would put Batman in a hedge maze that he would have to escape. Rocksteady felt it didn't fit the story that well, so they stuck with just Poison Ivy. From the leaked images of the 2007 version of Batman Arkham Asylum's map, we can see what looks like to be the botanical gardens, and if I'm correct about that, then we can assume the area I've highlighted is the hedge maze section. I could be completely wrong about this, but how cool is the 2007 build of the map? I wish it was playable. Did you know that in Batman Arkham Asylum, Mr. Freeze was meant to be a villain in the game? We don't have too much information about Mr. Freeze, but I believe it was scrapped fairly early on, as the writers felt it wouldn't make sense for Mr. Freeze to help the Joker during the events of the game. I guess they could have done what they did in Arkham City, where Joker took Nora as a hostage in order to make Mr. Freeze work for him, but I'm glad that they kept it for the sequel instead, as we may have never got the Mr. Freeze boss battle if the story beat was used in Arkham Asylum. I remember lunatics being pretty scary in Arkham Asylum back when I was a kid, and I'm sure they were to you as well, even though they did the exact same attack each time. Surprisingly, there was another version of the lunatic that actually made it to the final game, but as a decoration rather than an enemy. This enemy in the concept art was in a straitjacket with one arm still secure, but the other arm would be holding a baton. There's no explanation to why this character was cut, but if we go to the sanatorium in the medical facility, we can actually find this character's head in a jar. I think this is pretty cool that they kind of kept him in a way, but it's creepy that it's only his head. My only guess is that maybe they felt that they couldn't make this enemy different enough from a normal lunatic or a shock baton wielding enemy, so they decided to scrap him altogether. Before we move on to the cut NPCs of the game, I just have to give context to why these upcoming voice recordings sound so strange, such as Batman sounding like this.
I have far more important things to do with my time, I'm afraid.
This is because Rocksteady got members of its staff to fill in and record audio to test it out before the actual voice actors such as Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill arrived, so just mentally prepare yourself for some of these clips. There are actually a couple of cut officers from Batman Arkham Asylum. These characters would have tried to have aided Batman in the murder mystery storyline that was cut from the final game that I spoke about in my cut content video. Sadly, we don't have the actual character models, but at least we have the audio recorded. There is an officer named Andy in the 2007 build that we speak to at one point. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe he actually appears during the events of the final game. Andy tells us that he wasn't on duty at the time and it would be worth speaking to Officer Green.
Did you notice anything strange in the cell block last night?
I wasn't on duty last night. Speak to Green. He may be able to help on that one.
We actually meet an officer named Louis Green who actually appears in the intro of the game, who you'll remember saying,
"Keep your weapons trained on it at all times."
And Officer Green is actually one of the officers we saved from Harley Quinn hanging above the electrified water. But the file that we assume is Green's voice recording seems to continue the conversation labelled as Scott Green, so maybe it's the same character just with a different first name. A random Arkham guard mentions a character named Billy. From what I can guess, it's one of the murder victims in this murder mystery, and I just love the line delivery of this voice actor in the second clip.
Batman! Over here! I thought Billy was asleep.
But he's dead!
There's another cut character from Arkham Asylum named Lloyd, who we can assume is an Arkham staff member who doesn't seem to appear in the game, but actually has plenty of cut dialogue where he mentions some sort of issue that could have been a cut objective for us to solve or a part of the main story. This seems to be at the start of the game as he thanks us for capturing Joker.
Batman, have you got a second?
Yes, quickly if you can, Mr. Lloyd.
Oh, alright. I'll be brief. If you can, speak to the security guard at the front desk on your way out. There's a situation you might be able to help with.
Okay, what is it, Mr. Lloyd?
Thanks for your help with the Joker, Batman. I don't want to waste your time with trivial matters, but things have seemed a little out of place around Arkham lately.
Go on.
One of my staff, a young fella named Frank Hanrahan, seems to have vanished. His wife called early this afternoon looking for him, and she told me he never made it home.
I'm sure it's nothing, but when people start vanishing at Arkham, it can never be a good sign.
You probably heard also that Lloyd does mention a person named Officer Hanrahan in this discussion, but the only Officer Hanrahan we actually meet is in the GCPD in Arkham Knight and is female, but possibly she is the wife of Frank Hanrahan as mentioned by the guard.
Ah yes, Frank Hanrahan. This guy's normally reliable. His wife's been calling all day. I think she's pretty worried.
Maybe pure coincidence, but it's cool if they were actually together. There's a person named Kerrison in the game files, but there's no information if this is a staff member or officer. We can at least assume he works in the asylum, as he seems to have an idea where Batman should go in the building.
Batman, what can I do for you?
I'm looking for Officer Scott Green.
He should be in the Arkham main hall.
There are a few doctors that seem to have been cut out of the game early on in development, such as Dr. Jessup, who only had a few lines in the files, and I can only guess that he would be one of the doctors that appeared in the Sanatorium Predator section originally.
Batman, so, when can I put you down for a session? Are you familiar with my research on what makes a human mind break and produce such fascinating results as we have here in Arkham? And Batman, it's so nice to meet you. I am Dr. Jessup, the new psychiatrist here at Arkham. I've heard a lot about you, Batman. You intrigue me.
I don't care what you think, Doctor.
Really, I'd like to speak to you in more detail at some point. I'm interested in what makes Batman tick. My secretary can book you in for a session.
I have far more important things to do with my time, I'm afraid.
Another doctor named Dr. Walker seemed to have a decent amount of voice lines and even mentions how Officer Green has been kidnapped. This seems to be very early on in the story, as the inmates of the asylum have seemed to have just escaped.
Good evening, Batman. How can I help you? What can I do for you?
Batman, help! We're under attack! They've gone mad!
Calm down. What happened?
You need to help. They've got Green. Just a minute ago, inmates rushed in and attacked us for no apparent reason. What's happening?
I'll take care of it. Get to safety.
Sadly, one of the most important people in the Batman Arkham lore was cut from Arkham Asylum. There is a couple of voice lines from an Arkham member of staff named Barry, who I believe could be one of the people in the Joker gas we had to activate the ventilation to save, from what I gather from his audio track. Barry also mentions a Dr. Smith, but that doctor doesn't seem to appear in the game.
Dr. Smith, it's Barry. We're safe. Batman rescued us. Batman saved us, Dr. Smith. I'm gonna free you now.
In the early game files, it looked like there was going to be a narrator in Batman Arkham Asylum, most likely in the tutorial section of the game, but there's nothing that really confirms it. My other guess is that it could have been voice lines for a demo that they created to show the higher-ups how the game worked.
Welcome to the Batman Forensic Tutorial. You are in a crime scene. The body is surrounded by DNA. Scanning the DNA will create a filter that can be used to isolate this DNA from other samples in the area. As the DNA came directly from the corpse, we can assume it is a perfect match. The DNA leads to this cell. Ask the guard to open it for you. The grate is covered in Officer Green's prints. He must have used the grate to escape. He must have been the one to kill the prisoner. The coward has escaped justice this time. Just like the murderous scum that killed my parents.
I feel like this would have been optional if it was included in the final game, as I feel like it would unnecessarily slow down the pace of the game. That was every cut character from Batman Arkham Asylum. Majority of these characters came from the 2007 build of Arkham Asylum, which comes from Back to Life, who was very helpful in getting this information, and you should definitely check out his channel. But now let's move on to Batman Arkham City. I've already mentioned these characters that were cut from Arkham City in my previous facts and cut content videos, but some of you may have not seen it, so here's every cut character that I could find. Did you know that Nightwing was planned to be a bit more involved in Batman Arkham City? Starting off with Nightwing, and yes, Nightwing is a playable character in the challenge maps, but from hints and rumours, apparently he was going to be a bit more involved with the main story. From what I heard, there were plans to have a Nightwing story DLC, where Nightwing would have to protect Wayne Manor from Tiger guards around the time of Protocol 10, which would make sense as Hugo Strange, knowing Batman's identity, would most likely want to take out the rest of the Bat family also. I'm not sure how legit this is, but another hint is that Quentin Flynn was credited as Nightwing, although Nightwing has no speaking roles, meaning that he had a part to play, but it must have been removed at some point for some unknown reason. There are actually two versions of Clayface that were cut from Arkham City. There's a cut henchman that looks a lot bigger than the Clayface henchman we went up against in the final game. I believe this would have been an armoured type variant of Clayface's henchman that would have helped Clayface when we fight him at the Lazarus Pit and would have taken a few more hits to be taken down. We also have another version of Clayface, with Clayface disguised as Talia al Ghul in order to trick Batman, but sadly there's no more context to this image to know exactly what they were going for. You might not have known, but the Return to Arkham remaster of Batman Arkham City is based off an earlier build of the original. Virtuous Studios, who are the developers behind the remaster, accidentally left content that never was meant to make it to the final game. An example of this is Joker being a playable character within the files. With the use of a modded console, you can actually play as the Joker in the challenge maps as shown by Wastelander 121. If it was actually planned to be in the final game, I'm not 100% sure, but apparently Wastelander is working on making Joker playable for the PC version of Arkham City. Would you like to play as him? Sadly, there isn't that much to offer for Arkham City as there aren't any leaks like Arkham Asylum, but I still thought it would be worth talking about even though there isn't too many cut characters that we know of currently. Before we move on to Arkham Origins, if you're enjoying the content so far and want to support me further, please consider becoming a YouTube member. It can cost as little as 99¢ per month, which just this tier gives you access to exclusive emotes for the channel, and your name gets added to the description of the upcoming videos. Link in the pinned comment of this video where you can get a heap of benefits. Arkham Origins, we know, had a ton of cut content, mainly due to time constraints. Although no big villains that we know have been cut, it appears that there are some really interesting enemy variations, some pretty obvious, but some are pretty unique. There's actually a bunch more martial artist variants cut from Batman Arkham Origins, the first being a GCPD officer, the second being a Black Mask martial artist, and the third being an Anarchy supporter. These I don't think make as much sense as the other gangs, as it would be weird for martial artists to join up with the GCPD, and also it would be pretty repetitive if every gang had a martial artist, so I'm glad it wasn't overused. We can actually see the concept art for the GCPD and the Black Mask martial artist, with the Anarchy martial artist actually appearing in the E3 demo of the game, although you could say he was only added for the gameplay demo, but let me know what you think. According to Beanit Richer, the director of Batman Arkham Origins, WB Montreal had the idea to have playable villains that could roam around the open world of the game. Beanit doesn't specify which characters, but we can at least guess that Deathstroke would have been one of them. Another couple of characters could have been Joker and Bane, due to them being playable in the multiplayer, but I presume it would have been time sensitive, as at the end of the game, Bane's mind is basically mush and Joker has been captured. Something super interesting I found in the concept art for Batman Arkham Origins is a photo with drawings of low-level thugs, but these characters don't seem to appear at all in the game. Their names are Salesman, 20 Watches, Trespasser Todd, Moist Max or Mr. Soak, Jolly Jim, Thirsty Smokes or Just Smokes, Firecracker Phil, Fish Guts or Tom Fisher, Francis Postman, Post Mailman Spam, Vast Vin, Manfred Cast, Bobby Bottles, I do really like these designs, they're pretty unique for the characters. I saw a really good theory someone commented about this, saying that maybe they were used for a more hero shooter style game such as Overwatch, which I thought made sense as each thug has their own unique weapon and build to them, some of them even looking like Team Fortress 2 characters. My first thought is that it could have been something to do with the Nemesis system, having all these unique characters, but the more I thought about it, the less it made sense, as I feel like WB Montreal just wouldn't have the time to add something as significant as that. But I'd love to know your thoughts on what this could have been for. Comment down below. Sadly, there's not too much information on Arkham Origins, but at least there's a lot more than we saw from Arkham City. Being able to play as the villains in the open world would have been a cool idea. How well it would have worked though is hard to know, especially for traversal for Joker and Bane around the open world, if those were the playable villains planned. But let's move on from Arkham Origins to the last game of Rocksteady's trilogy. Arkham Knight actually had a few cut characters from low-level soldiers to pretty big villains in Batman's Rogues Gallery. It really is a shame, as apparently due to time constraints, Rocksteady had to cut these characters that I feel definitely would have been interesting to see in the final game. In Batman Arkham Knight, there was actually a cut militia checkpoint commander. There doesn't seem to be too much information on this commander, but we can guess that it's just another brute that takes a lot of damage. I doubt he would have done anything different to the other brutes, but it's interesting that they decided not to use this model in the final game, as I doubt it would have taken much effort to add it in. There are plenty of characters who appeared in the previous games that hadn't appeared in Arkham Knight. One of these characters is Clayface, who kinda disappeared off the face of the earth after Arkham City, but if we look at the concept art of Arkham Knight, we actually see an image of him hanging off the top of Panessa Studios. I wonder if Clayface was actually considered at any point to play a significant role in the game, as we can also find something that kinda looks like Clay in a room that is never used in the actual game near Panessa Studios. In the lore of the game, it's said due to Carlos Clay mixing with the Lazarus, Clayface isn't actually able to use his powers and is basically a pile of mud, which is a shame, as we probably could have had so much more with his character. It makes me wonder if this was a last minute decision to add that bit of lore in, as they didn't actually have time to create the boss fight that they wanted. Another cut character from Arkham Knight is Victor Zsasz, and yes, he did actually appear in the game, but he had nowhere near the impact that was originally planned for him. In the full game, all we get from Zsasz is a riddle and a quick glimpse of him while searching for Oracle in the clock tower, but in the early stages, Victor Zsasz was meant to have his own side mission, something similar to Arkham City from what I understand, but sadly this was cut due to it being too similar to another serial killer that made it to the final game, Professor Pig. But I feel like it still would have been cool to have Zsasz back one last time. Zsasz actually has plenty of cut voice lines that you can actually find in Mr. Jag's video, and I've put it in the description if you want to have a further listen. Here's what Zsasz will say once you defeat him and put him in the back of the Batmobile.
No. No! You condemn them to misery, Batman. I offer death. It was tragic what happened to you as a boy. To have survived when your parents were granted release.
Another big villain that was cut from Batman Arkham Knight was Prometheus. This character is barely mentioned in the Arkham games, which is a shame as he's pretty cool. An easy explanation for him is that he's an evil version of Batman, where his parents were criminals that were gunned down by the police, and then he vowed to take revenge on the law, which is kind of a flipped version of Batman. You probably remember the Easter egg in Arkham Asylum with the newspaper clippings going to the area where Harley Quinn captured the officers and held them hostage above the water, but apart from that, there's pretty much no new information that has come from him ever since. Looking at the in-game text files though, we can actually find Prometheus that was mentioned, making it seem like Rocksteady cut this character out fairly early on, as there's no other mention of him and no textures in the game files that relate to him. Personally, I think he's a really cool character that I don't have too much knowledge on, but from what I know, he does seem pretty interesting. Now, how interesting you can make Prometheus is another question, as people probably want to see more from him rather than just being a reverse Batman. Would have Rocksteady made a unique side mission that would have made him stand out from the others? Honestly, it's hard to tell. He was most likely cut due to time constraints, but it probably would have been difficult to create a worthwhile boss fight, as Prometheus is on par with Batman with his mental and physical abilities. But I guess until developer reveals how it was going to work, or it somehow gets leaked, then we probably won't know for a good while. Here's a character that we saw in Camouflage Studios' Arkham Shadow, which is Ratcatcher, who got a pretty decent role in the game, but apart from his gear that appeared in Arkham Origins and Asylum, just like Prometheus, we haven't actually seen him get involved or physically appear. Something interesting to point out though is underneath Riddler's hideout where he has captured Catwoman, we can actually find some TVs with what looks like could be Ratcatcher's face on it. If the Arkham Knight prequel comics are canon, then this wouldn't make any sense as Ratcatcher was actually killed by Jason Todd, but personally if it doesn't happen within the game, then there's always a possibility that that character's death could be written off if the character could be useful in a later game. Now there's no information other than this, so maybe it was just an accident or Ratcatcher was planned to be in the game but at some point he was cut out, but we probably won't know. Maybe it was a different design for Scarecrow, as we can see the Ace Chemicals logo across his chest, but it does look a lot more like Ratcatcher from the comics. No spoilers, but I felt that Ratcatcher was really good in Arkham Shadow, and if Rocksteady ever planned to make a post Arkham Knight game, then I'm sure they might consider Ratcatcher again due to his positive reception and the great performance from Carrie Payton, who you may know from The Walking Dead. The Batman Arkham franchise sadly has many characters that never made it to the final games, but that is every cut character that I could find. If there's any characters that you feel I missed, let me know in the comments below. Is there any that you wish were in the game like Prometheus? Be sure to like and subscribe. My name is Fo, and Slan.